Hi, and good morning, everyone. We're going to allow everyone to join us. I see our attendee numbers are going up, so we're going to just let everyone get into the room and get settled before we get started. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Lindsay Dubeldice. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Admissions and Awards at the George Washington University's Columbian College of Arts and Sciences. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Liz Kepferly, who is our Assistant Director of Graduate Admissions within our office as well. And we are very excited today to talk to you a little bit about the process and the steps for obtaining your student visa. So first of all, we want to say congratulations on your acceptance to GW. We are thrilled at the prospect of having you join us this fall or potentially this summer. And we wanted to help alleviate a little bit of the stress that we know that comes with applying for your student visa and going through this process. I want to just take a few moments to introduce myself. Again, I'm Lindsay Dubeldice. I've been with GW for almost 10 years now, working in various capacities with graduate students, as well as our international student population. And I have about 16 years of experience within higher education and enrollment management specifically. I was a former PDSO at one of my former institutions, so there's a lot of information here that we're really excited to share with you. Liz, do you want to give a brief intro of yourself before we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm Liz Kepferly, and I've been here at Columbian College at GW for about 10 years as well. But I have about now 30 years or so of admissions experience at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and most of that has involved international admissions. So both of us are really experienced and familiar with this process, and we hope that we can shed some light on it and ease your any discomfort you might be feeling right now or anxieties.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Just a few housekeeping notes as we go through. We do have the Q&A box that'll be open. You can feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A at any point during the presentation, and we'll try to address any timely questions about anything that's on a particular slide. If we don't get to your question right away, do not worry. It's likely because we have the information coming up on an upcoming slide, or we'll address it at the end if it's a little bit more specific. One thing I do want to note is that this is kind of a generalized presentation. So this presentation is designed to help as many folks as possible. So you may have a very particular situation that you have specific questions about, and we'll do our best to answer some of those today, but you will always have the option to connect with us via askccas@gwu.edu, and we would be happy to set aside some time to kind of work you through anything that's very particular to your personal situation. To give you an idea of some of the things that we're going to cover today, we are going to be talking about who exactly it is that needs a visa. What are the various visa types? We'll go through the required documents and give you an idea of the timeline. We'll also have some important reminders at the end, and then we will have a chance for your questions and answers. So everyone's mics are muted, so we do encourage you to use that Q&A feature so that we can kind of monitor questions and sort of group them together and answer as we can. And again, if you have any questions that are very specific to your personal situation, we do welcome you to email us directly so we can set up some time to walk you through your personal scenario. So to get us started, who needs a visa? Well, likely if you're here, you will likely need a visa. But essentially, most students who are not US citizens or permanent residents are going to require a visa to study in the US. both new and transfer visa holders, full-time enrollment is going to be required. So for us, that's going to be 9 credits of coursework or 3 classes, as most of our courses are 3 credits. What are the different student visa types that we have at GW? So most international students are going to require an F1 visa. And you may remember that you had to select your visa type initially when you indicated that on your application. So most of our international students require F1 visas, in which GW must issue you a document called a Form I-20 to demonstrate that your F1 visa is going to be sponsored by GW. If you're financed by your employer or your home government, you may require a J1 visa. Process is going to look pretty similar for you going through, except that we are going to issue you a document called a DS 2019, and that's going to demonstrate that your J1 is going to be sponsored by GW. Less common visa types that are that we see come through. Some of those other visa types are going to be allowed to be are going to be eligible for part-time study. Some of them are going to be full-time. So if F1 or J1 doesn't apply to you, we do encourage you to consult with your current visa sponsor or an immigration lawyer to confirm your eligibility before enrolling in courses. This presentation is really going to focus on the process for F1 and J1, and those are really our areas of expertise. So if you're not planning on applying for one of those or transferring, you're welcome to attend this webinar, but the information is really going to be geared towards those who are seeking an F1 or a J1. If you are in a B1 or B2 tourist status, or if you're currently in optional practical training, that often you cannot enroll in a degree program, including a graduate certificate, if you are in those current statuses. I know that some of you may already have visas that are issued and still valid. If you're going to be studying at GW, you're going to need a GW sponsored visa. So you'll really need to make sure that you are having any of your visas transferred to GW as the sponsoring institution. And as I mentioned, not all visas are going to afford you the opportunity to study. So please make sure that you're consulting an immigration lawyer for what makes most sense to you if you're not in an F1 or J1 status. So what are the steps to applying for your visa? So as a first-time student who is in your home country about to enroll in a program in the United States, either for the first time or it's been a very long time, you'll need to go through this process. So in this slide and the next one, we're going to talk you through all of those steps. And then in the subsequent slides, we are going to kind of talk to you about and detail all of the required documents. So once you've accepted your formal offer of admission and paid your enrollment deposit if it's required, and that will be noted in your admission letter if a deposit is required, we will send you an email regarding any items that you need before we submit your documents to our International Services Office. So our team in the Office of Graduate Studies acts as a conduit for you, the student, and our International Services Office. So the ISO is who actually prepares those documents and sends them to you directly. We kind of help with the paperwork gathering, and then we are also there as a resource to consult about what is required and what documents you need. So once you receive that email, it will come to you usually a few days after you have paid your deposit. We want you to read that email carefully because that is going to outline the requested documents. You'll want to try to do that as soon as possible, but definitely not later than the given deadline in that email. The longer you wait, the longer it can take, and it could delay your ability to request a visa appointment. So the longer you wait, the more students have accepted admission, the more documents that our ISO has to process, so the timeline gets stacked. So you'll want to try to do this all as soon as possible. And being here today to learn more information is actually an amazing first step because you're really going to be prepared once we are done. Once we've received all of your documents, we are going to send that over to our International Services Office. And then ISO will process those documents, and issue your Form I-20 or DS 2019. Typically, from when we send your documents to the ISO, it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks for them to process the document. Sometimes it's faster. Sometimes it really does take those full 3 weeks. So that's why we really encourage you to start submitting um, those documents as soon as possible. Um, you'll use that Form I-20 or the DS 2019 to apply for your F1 or J1 visa from the US Embassy or consulate in your country. So you'll do that in your country. And the length of the application review process really does depend on what country you're in. And we'll mention this again later, that you definitely use the consulate's website to kind of get an estimate for how long those visa appointments take. In some countries, we're seeing very, very long wait times. So that, again, is another reason why we really encourage you to start submitting this paperwork as soon as possible. After you receive your visa, you will be ready to come to DC and visit us. And so you'll be ready to start your studies. And so for the audience that we're currently speaking to, that will be towards the end of August for our fall studies. For transfer students, so it's possible to transfer a DS 2019. We very rarely encounter that situation. So the most common is students who are transferring their I-20. So very similarly to initial students, you'll receive your offer of admission and will need to accept that as well as submit your deposit if required. And you'll also receive a similar email letting you know what documents we require before we send those over to our ISO office. You'll again want to read that document very carefully and send us the requested documents via email as soon as you can. There are additional documents that are required for transfers. So you'll need to select a specific date in which you want to transfer your CVIS and student exchange visitor record over to GW. So you'll have to pick a date where your visa will end with your current institution and will begin with GW. Um, you'll want to meet with your current institution's international services office or whomever kind of manages that process to determine the date that your CVIS record can be transferred. We typically recommend about a month prior to the first day of classes. So if you're, for example, if you were starting in the spring, if your transfer date was December 15th, and that'll be around the time that you received your I-20, you would want to allow yourself enough time for classes to start. So if classes were to start in mid-January, you'd want to have that transferred in mid-December. ISO will issue your Form I-20 approximately on the date that you've chosen to transfer. So that's an important note. You can send all of your documentation over. You can get everything in and everything set and complete, but your I-20 will not be issued to you until the date of transfer. In most cases, you're not going to need to apply for an F1 from the embassy or consulate if you're transferring your I-20 status. And then once you've received the I-20, you'll be ready to start your classes at GW. Some of the typically required documents. Some students upload some of these documents when you originally apply. That's not required or expected. So excuse me, you'll get an email with what we're asking you for after you've decided to deposit and enroll. All applicants requesting an I-20 or DS 2019 from GW are going to be required to submit the following. No matter who you are, no matter what, if you're a transfer or an initial, you're going to be asked to submit these documents. You're going to need to complete a visa request form that's signed by you. We're going to go through this visa request form in detail in the up. This visa request form is going to need to be signed by you and, if applicable, any sponsors that you have. You're also going to need to submit a bank statement or other acceptable proof of funds, and a clear copy of the biographical page of your current valid passport. And again, we're going to go through all of these documents in great detail in these upcoming slides. Sorry, my daughter's leaving for school. It's around 8:16 in the morning here today. Goodbye. Bye, Pops. So in addition to, so if you're a transfer student, in addition to those initial documents, you're also going to need to submit some additional paperwork to allow us to transfer your visa from your other institution. So certain students who are currently in F1 or J1 status or who have studied in the US in the last 12 months are going to need to submit these documents in addition to the documents from the previous slide. So you're going to need to submit a copy of your I-94, the most recent and the history, a copy of your most recent I-20 and or DS 2019, a copy of your US visa, the completed CVIS transfer form if you're currently in the US, and an OPT forfeit letter and a copy of your employment authorization document or EAD if you're currently in OPT status. So again, these documents are in addition to the documentation that you might need, that you would need if you, sorry, in addition to the other documents that you'll need to submit your visa request. So at this point, we're going to start going through some of these documents a little more closely. Let me go ahead and turn things over to Liz to talk you through these next steps.
Thanks, Lindsay, and hi again, everyone. So as Lindsay noted, I'm going to walk you through the process of completing the visa request form, which is required of all incoming students who need an F1 or J1 visa. And this is true even if you are a current student at George Washington University who is changing programs. And you can access this form via the short URL at the bottom of the next few slides. So the full name of the form is a very long visa request for international applicants requesting an I-20, F1, or DS 2019, J1. I will mostly be calling it the VRF or the form in the rest of this presentation. Make sure that when you're filling out the form that you answer all the questions as necessary. Our current form has automatic fill-in sections and drop-down lists to try to help you avoid errors. So we really encourage you to fill out the form online first, to click on the link and fill out the form online and then print it to PDF. If you print it out so that you fill in blanks, you might make some of the errors that we'll try to help you avoid in this presentation. So first they ask for your biodata. In this case, the student who is coming here is John Q. student. And the address must be a permanent address outside the United States. So even if you are currently living in the United States or plan to live in the United States with a relative, you must provide an address outside the United States in order to qualify for an F1 or J1 visa. Then you have to select your start term and start year from the available drop-down list. And it will really only give you a couple options because each form is renewed every year. And if you are applying for, or if you're planning to start in a semester for which the form hasn't been created yet, you'll have to wait till the form is ready. So if you need to change your start term after you've already submitted everything and even after you've received an I-20, you're going to have to submit a new form for the new start term that you will be beginning your program. So we've also already filled in the GW school blank because that always caused a lot of questions. The GW school to which you are applying is Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, and all of our 90 graduate programs are under Columbian College of Arts and Sciences. We've also provided all the degrees and programs that we offer so that you would select your degree and your program from that drop-down list that you see outlined in blue on the screen. The last two questions on this screen move us into what can be a tricky section for some applicants. For the vast majority of the students who are applying for visas who are asking us for I-20s or DS 2019, the answers to these questions, the last two questions, are either yes and yes or no and no. So yes and yes means you are currently finishing up a program in the United States. You are currently on an F1 or J1 visa. You are still in the United States. You have not left. And in that case, you're a transfer student, and you will provide us with all those extra documents that Lindsay asked for, in addition to the core 3 documents: passport, financial information, and this visa request form. If you, like most of our incoming applicants, have not studied in the United States before, this is your first time asking for a F1 or J1 visa, your answer is going to be no and no in most cases, and you just provide those 3 documents. So those are the 2 most common: yes and yes, or no and no. And so if you answer no to both questions, you're seeking an initial I-20 or DS 2019, and then there are sub-questions after these 2. If you answered no and no, you do not need to answer those sub-questions. In fact, we'll probably send it back and say, please delete your answers to these questions. If you answered yes and yes, you must answer the sub-questions that you see on this next slide. So, next slide, please. So if you answered yes and yes, you're currently in the United States and you're on F1 J1 status, your answers to these next questions are also pretty clear. What is your current immigration status? It's either going to be F1 or J1. If it's F1, it also might be F1 OPT. Do you plan to remain in the US and apply for a change of status? Do you plan to travel outside the US? Right? All of these questions are different for each student who is not a standard no and no. And if you have questions about how you should answer these, please reach out to us. The one thing I want to say is that that first question, that first yes, no question after what is your current immigration status, if your current immigration status is not F1 or J1, we strongly advise you to answer this question no. If you are in the United States, but you are not in F1 or J1, we strongly encourage you to exit the United States to apply for your visa. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it does take a lot of extra time. So please watch out for that. If your current immigration status and you are in the United States is not F1 or J1, again, as Lindsay mentioned earlier, there are many different visa types that you could be legally currently in the United States on. Some of them do permit study part-time or sometimes full-time. Some of them do not permit study. And one of those is the B or tourist visa. So if you're on a tourist visa, you will very likely have to exit the US, apply for your F1 or J1 visa, and then return. The final question is about dependents. Some of our students do bring dependents with them, spouses or children. If your answer to this is yes, then you will have to complete an extra form and provide extra documents as well as extra funding proof for those dependents. So if that is your case, please read that information carefully on the form and on the financial documentation page, which will be on page 2 of the visa request form. All right, in the next slide, you see what is information that is provided at the bottom of page 1 of the visa request form. This information is an estimate for the cost of attendance each year of a program. That bottom number there, 6897, is actually misleading for students in Columbian College graduate programs. I'm going to talk about where you're going to get the actual number. It's close to that, that you will need to use to complete your form and to provide financial documentation. Please note that all of these are estimates. Depending on your situation, your tuition and fees may be a little higher than what you see or a little lower than what you see. Your actual living expenses may be a little higher or a little lower if you're lucky than that $20,850 that you see there. And similarly for books and supplies and health insurance. The amounts that are given, though, are the amounts that you need to use to complete the form. In particular, if you're bringing dependents, please look at those numbers at the very bottom for each of your dependents. And also the amount may change for you depending on how many years you're going to be studying. Please do not worry about recalculating numbers based on your situation. Please use the general estimates that we've provided because that will streamline your I-20 or DS-2019 issuance process. Okay, on the next slide, you're going to see the first batch of entries on the page 3 of the visa request form. And please note that you can find this page 3 only on the visa request form that is on the Columbian College website at the URL at the bottom. And the main number that you're going to be looking for to complete your visa request form is the number in blue. And the number is based on our estimate and our calculations of the number of credits that your program requires, the number of years that your program typically requires students to take before completing the degree, and so forth. The actual amounts, again, may vary, but use these numbers, please, in completing the form. So that blue column is the most important. So you can see, just looking at, this is not the entire list that is on page 3, but just looking at the programs that are there, you can see a range of total cost per year from about $52,000 to about $85,000 per year, depending on the program. And that really depends on how many credits a program requires each semester and how much the tuition is per credit. Most of our programs have a standard tuition rate, but a few of them have variable rates, and those are listed on this list. In this next slide, we've pulled out 2 lines from the chart on page 3 of the visa request form that address probably the 2 most common total amounts for our programs. The all remaining master's program line is typically for 30 credit master's programs that you complete in 2 years. And you would use the total cost per year of about $55,000. The second line is for all of our PhD programs. The PsyD program is a little bit different and it has its own line on the page 3. But all of our PhD programs are 9 credits per semester, 18 credits per year. And that is the overall estimate of the total cost per year, $66,554. You can round up a little bit, like 55,000 or 61,000 when you're completing your visa request form chart. But I strongly urge you not to add massive amounts of money because it doesn't really make a difference in terms of issuing your I-20. If you say $100,000 instead of $55,000, you have to provide the extra financial documentation, and you don't have to have that extra money for the purposes of visa issuance or I-20 issuance. So again, the most important column here is your third column in blue. Please note that what you actually spend in a given year could, again, as I said before, could be more or less. If, for example, you are fortunate to have family members who live in the Washington area, your living costs will go will be quite low. You won't have to pay for rent, for example. You still need to complete the form as though you do not have family here. You have to complete the form as though you're completely on your own. The actual cost to you will be less, but for visa purposes and for I-20 or DS-2019 purposes, please, again, use the numbers that we are providing. Okay. I'm starting now to show you examples of filling out the chart on page 2 of the visa request form. This is a common way of filling out this chart. I think we have an example on the previous page, on the previous slide, of the very most common, which is family sponsorship. And what you're seeing here is a family sponsorship for a standard 30 credit master's program. So you would fill out the chart only on the family sponsor line. The amount on the family sponsor line matches the total amount. which you found on the blue column of page 3. And it's the same amount for both of a 2-year program, which again, you look for on the chart on page 3. Some of the master's programs are only 1 year, some are 1.5, some are 3 years. Most of them are 2 years. In this case, and Lindsay's going to talk about this as well, your financial documentation needs to show that your family sponsor has enough money to cover year 1, right? So they only need to show that they have $55,000 in the bank. Why? Because they're continuing to work, we assume. And so they will continue to be able to earn funds to cover year 2 when that year comes. On the next chart, example B, you will see if you are sponsoring yourself. And there you put both amounts on the self-support line for year 1 and 2, which match the total, which match the blue column on the chart on page 3. And in this case, you're going to have to show that you have all of those funds now up front. Why? Because your job once you come here is to be a student. You might be able to work on campus in year 1 for about 20 hours a week, but you're not going to be able to earn sufficient funds in your first year to cover all the costs in the second year. So you need to show for visa purposes that you have that money up front. All right, on example C, we'll see a combination, and this is also very, very common. You might have some GW partial tuition funding, you might have some money that you've saved up yourself, and you might have hopefully a family or other sponsor to assist you in the cost of your studies. In this case, you have to divide it up. And to look for how to fill out the GW award section, you need to double check the funding letter that you got after you paid your deposit or after you accepted your admission. And that will tell you how much you're getting in year 1 and how much you're getting in year 2. Is it, are you covered for 4 semesters? In that case, it's the even amount in both years. If you're only covered for 3 semesters, that amount for GW in year 2 is going to be a little bit less. Again, for self-support, this student that you see here, $10,000 per year of self-support, this student will have to show us that they have $20,000 right now. But they have to show us that the family has $36,000 right now. So that's a combination, and there's different guidelines depending on whether it's self or family or GW. For the GW, please look at your award letter. If your parents or you take out a loan, it depends whose name the loan is in. If the loan is in your name, that amount goes on the self-support line. If the loan is in a family name, that amount goes on the family line. Loan is not other. It's in the name of whoever has the loan. All right. We've got another example here, example D, which is for a PhD student who is fully funded by GW. But again, please note that these are estimates taken off of the chart, the blue column on page 3. So even if you sit there and you calculate out, oh, how much they told me that I'm getting for my stipend plus insurance and so on, it might be a little bit different from this amount, but please just use this amount to complete this chart. Some PhD students don't have full funding from the university, and so they might have a combination as shown in the previous slides with the master's students. So there may be some self-support, some family support, possibly some government support, and maybe a little bit of GW award. And the general rules that I described for the master's students still apply for the PhD in that case. Just remember that for a PhD student, you have to complete the chart for all 5 years. And again, look at page 3 to figure out how many years your program is supposed to fill out the chart for. Okay, on the next slide, we come to the signature section, and you must always sign the visa request form and date it. If you have a family sponsor, they would sign here. And if you have more than one family sponsor, there are really 2 ways to do this. My preferred way is to do it as you see on the slide, where you have both sponsors sign, put both sponsors' names and both sponsors' relationships, but clearly differentiate between the two of them. But it is also possible to just have the second sponsor sign on a second printout of the page 2 signature block. All right. I think I'm going to hand the mic back over to Lindsay now so that she can give you more advice on the financial documents, especially which can be tricky. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Liz. All right, everyone. So let's talk a little bit more about the proof of funds documentation. So we talked a little bit about, we talked a lot about how to fill out the form, what those different sections look like, and how you can fill out the funding section. So what are the exact funding documents that we need? If you are self-funded or funded by an individual sponsor, we are going to require a bank statement that shows that you or your sponsor have the funds that you expect to use. We definitely recommend, and we say this in bullet point 2, that you provide us with a document that has been issued recently. We recommend the past few months or more recent if possible, but it cannot be more than a year old. So no more than 12 months, but preferably more recently. That document needs to include the bank's name, address, and telephone number. That is a requirement from our ISO. They ask that they have those pieces of information. So most of these documents are going to be submitted on bank letterhead that already includes those items. In addition, they need to clearly show the name of the account holder, clearly state the currency that's in the account. We don't require that they are shown in US dollars, but we need to know what the currency is so that we can do so that we can check the transfer rate. And it needs to indicate that the funds are liquid. And what we mean by liquid is that they are available for immediate withdrawal without any restrictions on them. So it's usually a checking or a savings account. If you have like a CD or a money market account that has a maturity date, the document must state clearly and explicitly that you are going to be able to withdraw those funds before the start of classes without any type of penalty. So this needs to be very explicit in that letter, or we're going to bounce that back to you and ask you to provide an updated documentation. If you're applying with or if you have an account that has more than one person's name on it, so if you have an account that is shared by, for example, your mother and father, both of those names are going to need to be signed on the visa request form. So they are both going to need to be shown here, like Jane and Joe. They would need to both sign on the sponsor signature line. It can be a little bit of a tight squeeze. So we definitely recommend, having them physically sign it so that it can be a little bit easier to squeeze all of those names on there. In addition, so we are also, oh, I'm sorry, moved to the wrong slide. So once we have all of these documents together, we are going to review them in our office, and then we will forward them to our international services office. They're going to be the ones that will issue you the I-20 or the DS 2019. Again, this typically takes anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the time period. It can have a faster turnaround. So the earlier you submit that, the better chance you have of it having a faster turnaround. It just really depends on their workload, how many students are applying for visas, and how long it's going to take them to get through their queue. So again, by being here today, you're taking a great step to kind of getting a jump start on getting your documents submitted as quickly as possible so that we can then get that turned around as quickly as possible. We will email you once your documents are complete and we've sent them to our ISO, and then you will receive an email confirmation once your document has been sent to you. That email confirmation is going to include your student and exchange visitor number or CVIS number that you're going to use to set up your visa appointment with the embassy or consulate. To apply for your visa. So once you have that I-20 or DS 2019 in hand, you can then go and apply for your visa. That process is managed by the U.S. Department of State, and you'll apply for your visa at the embassy or consulate in your country. If you're transferring your I-20, you're generally not going to need to apply for a new visa, but if you are unsure, you can always double check. We recommend consulting the State Department website for detailed information about what you need to apply for your F1 or J1. And again, you should apply as soon as possible after receiving your I-20 or DS 2019, in case the review process takes a long time. We have heard that in certain countries, the wait is months long, if not years long. So definitely check that process out now. And you can use the links below that you see on the bottom of the screen to view wait times for most areas. If you have questions about the process for your specific country, we definitely recommend contacting the U.S. Embassy or Consulate or using Education USA advising centers as a resource as well. We would encourage you never to pay someone to help you with your visa application. The State Department, the embassies, Education USA are all free resources, and they are the most dependable and will be the best resource for you. Common questions. So here are some really common questions. Some I see in the chat currently. Others you may not have thought of, but these are some of the common questions that we get. How much funding must I certify in order to get an I-20 or a DS 2019? This answer is going to be based on our standard 30 credit master's program. So you'll want to really make sure that you review page 3 of that visa request form for your specific program's estimated costs. And remember to provide funding for the full duration of the program on that visa request form. But basically, if you're a self-sponsored student, you're going to need to prove that you have sufficient funds to cover $110,000 for every year of studies that you're at GW. That's every year of studies. You, as a self-sponsored student, you have to show that you have liquid funds available for the full cost of attendance for the entire duration of your program. If you're sponsored by a parent or other individual, then your sponsor must show that they have sufficient funds for just the first year of study. So for this example, $55,000, that number may vary depending on your program. It may be slightly higher or about the same. Can you include scholarship funds as part of your financial certification? Absolutely, yes, please do. Make sure that you do. So if you've received scholarship funds from GW or even external scholarships, you'll want to make sure that you include that on your visa request form because that's going to lessen the burden that you need to show that you have in liquid funds. So you can indicate that amount of the scholarship on page 2 of the visa request form and submit a copy of your award letter or other documentation. If your award letter is from GW, we do not need you to resend that letter. We have that in our files. But if you're receiving any sort of external scholarships, you'll need to submit any sort of paperwork that shows the amount on that as part of your funding documentation or financial documentation. Can you include bank loans as part of your financial certification? In some cases, yes. Again, they need to be unrestricted. They need to be approved. And then based on who the loan is being issued to will determine where you need to indicate that on your visa request form. If the loan is in your name, you would put that under your self-funded. If the loan is in a parent or sponsor's name, then you would need to include that under the parent or sponsor. The loan information does not need to go under other, because once they've issued the loan to a specific person, that money then belongs to that person. If I'm currently in the US in visa status other than F1 or J1, can I apply for an F1 or J1 visa without leaving the country? As Liz mentioned, we strongly advise that you return to your home country and apply for your F1 visa there. The process of changing status in the US is very, very time consuming and very slow, and it would be extremely unlikely that you would receive your new visa in time to begin studying at GW as you planned. So at this point, it would likely take longer than you would you if you started that process. You likely wouldn't be able to start studying at GW in the fall if you just started that process now. Some Columbian College and GW events to watch for. So some resources for you as you kind of continue through the process of enrolling at GW. The Columbian College new student orientation events will all be online. So keep an eye to your email as we get into the summer months for that information on how to attend. Our International Services Office also hosts a mandatory check-in and a mandatory orientation for all international students. So you will receive more information from ISO again over the summer. And then department specific orientation. So your particular department will likely have their own orientation that talks you through the ins and outs and how your department functions. So they will be sending those out. Please be sure to check your GW email. So once you've deposited, you'll receive and accepted your admission, you'll receive more information about how to set up your GW email. And once that GW email has been created, that is where all of our official communications are going to go. So you'll want to make sure that you're checking that GW email address in addition to your regular email address. And it's Gmail based, so you're able to kind of transfer or set up forwarding to various email accounts if you don't like having to log into separate courses or separate email inboxes. And as a reminder, pre-registration for fall classes opened in March. So, and will run until the day before classes begin. So you're going to need to be registered to obtain your like GW ID card or to have any GW funding applied to your account. So you'll want to make sure that you are getting in touch with your department to find out about which courses you need to register for. And if you need to find out who your department contact is, that is available on the Columbian College website.